Hello and welcome everyone to today's WorkSafe Tasmania month webinar, WorkSafe, Enjoy Life, Teamwork and Partnership Can Make a Positive Difference, Lessons from the Field. I'm Stephanie Morawski from WorkSafe Tasmania and I will be your moderator. Before we start, we ask that you take a moment to read the following slide about information received today. I will now explain how you can participate in today's webinar. Please use the questions window on your control panel to type and submit questions at any time during today's webinar. Questions will be addressed at the end of today's presentation. Only presenter webcams will be used and today's webinar is being recorded. I would now like to introduce your presenters. Today's webinar will be led by Martin Bradfield, Managing Director at Safety Circle, with the support of his team, Oliver Bodak and Oliver Fearman. Martin has qualifications in science, occupational hygiene, and competitive systems and practices. He has over 30 years' experience in work health, safety and environment, occupational hygiene, coaching and leadership development in New Zealand, Australia and other parts of the world across different industries, services and government sectors. Martin's interests are in making a difference, continuous improvement, reducing waste, improving the management of risks and empowering people to make better choices so everyone stays safe and well every day and can enjoy life to the fullest. Welcome everyone.
Unmute myself and then everyone will be able to hear me. All right, so as Stephanie said, so I'm Marty Bradfield, Managing Director of Safety Circle, and today we're just trying to really share with you some of the focus we have as far as WorkSafe, Enjoy Life and some of the key lessons we have obtained across the field in our work. So just a little bit of, I suppose, more general background about myself. So I started work as a farmer, milk cows, and then grew up in worked in dairy factories and then trained up as an industrial chemist. And I was actually working as an industrial chemist. I really got interested in health and safety. I was working in this paint factory in Auckland in New Zealand. And I remember walking in there on the first day and literally gagging with the fumes and wondering how people could survive in there. But what you noticed was they were a very happy workplace. So they all had big grins on their faces. And the reason for that really became evident over time because what I noticed was that the solvent exposure was so high that people were actually pretty much smashed on the solvents. And what I also noticed was that there was a very much a long-term health impact on people that have worked there for a long time, which is why then I transitioned into occupational hygiene and really getting interested in that, preventing the short-term and long-term impacts of health, safety, risks in workplaces. And then went working in Tasmania for several years and did a round with WorkSafe Tasmania as well. And then working as a consultant and been working as a health and safety consultant for 24 years now. And one of the things we noticed, it was probably 12, 13 years ago now, we noticed that people were making a lot of effort around health and safety. And actually, sometimes sometimes the effort didn't actually result in the sort of outcomes that you'd actually want, or there wasn't really significant improvement. So people were doing a lot of stuff, but sometimes because the focus was not on managing risk well, or we didn't have an aligned team, then we didn't necessarily get the outcomes that we'd all want. So what we found was that if we actually were going to really make a difference, that we actually needed to shift people's thinking, and particularly, shift people's thinking in the field, in their workplaces. And so one of the things that happened a decade or so now ago, we found this little technique that was looking to draw circles, and what we found was that this simple thing of actually drawing a circle and actually then getting people aligned to what we actually want around health and safety really helped to shift people's thinking. And so what we found was that this goal of home safe and well really resonated with people in the workplace and really helped to get people aligned and shift their thinking. So this then became a really key thing that we've actually been using in the field ever since. And what we find is that if you actually shift people's thinking, then with the circle and safety circle, what we find is giving people a simple language to speak to and interact with each other, which is why we're going to focus on that this afternoon, really then helps to drive different actions. Because if we get people taking action here, managing the risk well, then we can get better outcomes and get the results that we actually want in the field. So we work for, we've worked with all types of different organisations around the world, as Stephanie said, and lots. We're based in Tasmania and work then from our Tassie base around the world for all types of organisations. And it's interesting, whether we've been working with zoos, the rail that we're going to talk about today, organisations like Fenner Dunlop. One of the things we've found is really the only common thing in those workplaces is that they've got people. And we find that wherever we work and any organisation, we can actually make a difference if we shift people's thinking, get them to manage the risk well, and make better choices. So, just some of the things that we've been up to over the years. So, as we said, been doing this for a long time now, but, and across all different types of workplaces, whether it be heavy industry. One of those photos was in a manufacturing organisation we work with at in Boston in the US, and you can see the giraffe in the background with the zoos. But this approach can really make a difference in the field. So one of the things then that what we do is really focusing on that we need to have key parts, key things in place to be able to manage the risk well. So we've got to actually have the right equipment, the right plant. We've got to actually have the right systems or processes, and critically we need to have the the right people with the right skills and competency, the right sort of leadership. And so those are the three things that we really focus on. And so one of our approaches is as we're going to look at today, is surveying all workplaces and finding out what their current work health and safety climate is like, and also looking at the people and really focusing on are we actually managing the risk well? Do we have the pieces in play to manage risk? So one of the places where we start in workplaces typically is actually doing what we would call like a diagnostic or an assessment of what their current state is of these three things, and looking at what's their strength, what's their reliability about actually being inside the circle. Because the interesting thing is if we're actually really reliable about being inside the circle, consistently managing the risk, then it actually sets us up to be successful, sets us all up to be able to go home safe and well every day, which is why we focus on that. And the reason why we draw it the way we have there in that picture is that what we're looking to do is really strengthen that leg of people, because it's actually people that are making the choices in the moment. It's the people that can actually interrupt, when things are getting outside the circle. It's people that set up the equipment. It's people that buy the equipment. It's people that actually set up the systems and processes. It's people that need to follow the systems and processes. So we really want to focus on the people and really strengthen that leg of people. And it's interesting, with looking at some of the organisations we work with, for example, Fenner Dunlop, they have a great, level of technical risk that they work with, taking conveyor belts in and out, and had very strong in the area of equipment and very good, systems and processes around how do you, pull big belts out and replace them, etc. But it was really interesting what they came to us, as a problem was what they had people working across multiple sites and different workplaces. Is that what they simply wanted was to actually, shift people's thinking into the positive, where you want to have this common goal, but also very much just a language that everyone could understand and a simple way to actually interrupt each other. So very much focusing on that people aspect, that if we strengthen the people to think and communicate well, then it will drive different actions. And it's interesting, they were doing remarkably well, I think, for their risk profile, and had a total recordable injury frequency rate of 4 when we started working with them. And it's great to see they have gone under 1, which is pretty incredible for 1,200 people working in high-risk situations a lot of the time. So this is one of the reasons when we focus on the work safe, enjoy life, because it's really getting people to see that we actually want to get this to work. So really, we're looking to put it in the positive, and this is something that we all want. And then we want people to take it on, as a 24/7 objective, not just at work, but also, at home and play. Because if you've looked at any of the data and the research, statistically, we're actually safer at work. So a lot of incidents actually happen, at home. But of course, you get hurt at home, the pain's the same, it just costs you more. So we want people to take this on as a 24/7 activity. And really, putting this in the field and putting it into life, this is we want to make it a life skill. Managing risk well is key focus for making this work. Because if our thinking is different and we build that culture of managing risk well at work, then it typically will go into home. And if we keep on doing this at home, then it keeps on helping us at work as well. So we want to do it 24/7. So just a couple of little case studies here, and then we'll talk about Tasrail as well in a bit more detail. But this is one of the case studies we're working with Zoos Victoria, have done for quite a few years now. So you can see some data there back in 2014, 15, and we did an event for them today actually, which is great. And you can just see some of the results that we've been obtaining with organisations like Zoos Victoria, and really interesting, just looking at some of the stuff that they were doing really well as far as front of house goes, but really then shifting their focus to make sure that they were looking after the people, not just the animals. And they've just, my view, they've knocked it out of the park as far as made a difference and really reduced the risk. And we'll look at reliability today and look at the in the field actually how we can measure that and also talk to it. But one of the things, as I said before, with looking at how reliable we are inside the circle, then we look at the consistency and the strength. And this is some data from part of Zoos Victoria. So this is from Werribee Open Range Zoo. And you can see there on the slide where they were at back in 2016. And so in the sort of unreliable to low area there. And what we're looking at organisations is we really want to be in that space of being highly reliable and having teams that are highly reliable. And so you can see over a period of time, as we work with them, they've come up now into 2019, coming up to 70 there, and they're demonstrating that they're on a path to become highly reliable as far as a wellbeing, health and safety culture, which is fantastic. And Tasrail is another workplace that we've been working with for many years, and it's they won this award back in 2018, and we've been partnering them for a long time. We started working in 2016 with Tasrail, and you can see where they were as far as the data point goes, and that's they have improved over time, which is great. So picked up, and also just done a great job at improving their overall injury rates, etc. as well. So if with the program we've been running with Tasrail, we've been working with them as far as at leadership level, engaged with all their team members, and also over the period of time worked on some specific risk management challenges for them as well and helped them with that. And recently just been working on a fatigue program with helping them to really put in a strong program of supporting their people to be able to stay inside the circle, given their 24/7 workload at times, and just the way people are commuting and driving trains. So they've done really well. And then I'm going to hand over to Oliver Bodak, who's going to talk about Tasmania as a little snapshot.
All right, g'day folks. Tasrael sent an apology. Matt Patton, General Manager of Freight Services, was going to be here with us today, but unfortunately a family matter has pulled him away. So I'll do my best. I was lucky enough to be part of the team that kicked off in 2016 with Tasrael, and have a next event already lined up in December with them. So I understand them well, and I'll look to portray their information here as well as possible. So Tasrael are the vertically integrated operation here in Tasmania. Run a couple of lines that are actually super essential, particularly when it comes to seeing the goods on our shelves when we go to buy groceries. They have an incredible record of looking to improve. And really what got us involved right at the beginning with Tasrael was they were finding that, hey, we're doing a lot of things, however we feel that we're stagnated. So they're looking at what was that next step change for them with regards to improvement in their health and safety. And those statistics you can see there, one of the things we often don't think around the risks with regards to our train services, but they're particularly drivers and rail operators, ROs, drive an incredible amount of kilometres on the road as well. So as you can appreciate, a driver will take a train from A to B, and there's not necessarily a train heading back in the other direction straight away. So there's a lot of driving done in all the different weather conditions down here in Tasmania. So that's one of their key risks, and it was actually the driving that really flagged the need or provided the data with regards to their fatigue program that they've undertaken over the last few years. But looking to the beginning and really how Tasrael view health and safety to provide that particular context. Using the rail analogy, but really thinking about, we actually have an acceptable risk and an unacceptable risk. So in safety circle, we'll say inside the circle is acceptable risk and outside. Using this particular analogy of in the boundaries of, where are we at any point in time? How are we going within, our standards, procedures, our policies, looking at actually how we're not just behaving, but how are we set up to succeed? And obviously, we want to be within the green boundaries. Sometimes we appreciate, particularly within high-risk work environments, that we might go into the amber, but we can never justify going into the red, because in those instances we're actually saying that we're comfortable for people to get hurt or worse, and of course we're not comfortable with that. And the saying within Tasrael is, we took it from our boundaries and we made it into a circle. So since we've engaged with Safety Circle and Tasrael, they've taken this analogy and put it in the circle analogy of inside the circle is acceptable risk, inside the circle is consistent with what we want out of life, and outside the circle is we're relying on luck to actually achieve the results that we actually all want to achieve. Looking at Safety Circle, as far as are we working inside the circle, it was a great program, and continues to be a great relationship with Tasrael. And it's amazing the different places we go and still see this up on the wall, and seeing how it's actually evolved into their own as well, because taking ownership of any program is actually key to its success. And as far as the those boundaries and viewing it as a journey as well, and that was definitely a mandate right from the start with the executive of, this isn't a program and we're done. We're actually on a continual safety journey, and we want to integrate this into how we do that. So as far as just some key points that Tasrael have taken out and reported back with regards to keys to their success was they look to circle all of their workforce very quickly. It was deemed to make sure everyone's on the same page. That was a real critical success factor as far as they were concerned, and it was a layered approach. So starting with the executive and then working through the leaders and then the workforce. The commitment from the executive and the alignment at executive level and resourcing the program has ensured its initial success and continued success. So they had a resource, based on their geographical location, number of people, the shifts they work, and all those types of pieces. They had a person committed to the program full-time for a year, or virtually full-time for a year. In other workplaces, we've seen people not need to take on that level. Just as a reference point, again, it depends on the types of operations you run, where the risk is, and how we actually access all these points and touch points. And then after 12 months, we ran a booster program to check in with everyone to see, hey, you got on board, you reported some things, how are we tracking? And it was really great that after 12 months, and I say we, the people of Tasrail had achieved great things, and we've been fortunate enough to be able to support a lot of those things, and there was still plenty to do. And I think that eyes wide open and that ability to be completely honest about our current state, as opposed to, we think it's here, but no, actually this is where we are, that's aligned with not just what people are telling us, but with what we're seeing as well, has been one of the key success indicators too, that Tasrail have actually been able to feel and experience through that time. This comment here, keep it simple. We talk to Safety Circle, it's very simple. It's about thinking, communicating, doing and learning. And of course, we can all appreciate the complexity of each of those pieces. So keeping it simple as far as we're inside or outside the circle, we can all understand that. Safety Circle came from working with workplaces that didn't have high literacy or numeracy. So making sure we keep it simple and can make it workable for everybody. And of course it works, all the way through to, academics, so to speak, because it's not just a concept we can understand, but something we can relate to. The in parallel comment here is, I think, really valid, and we've continued to learn a lot from our engagement with Tasrail as well, is that there needs to be continued focus on highly complex, sorry, what's the right word here? I've just had my blank. We have high consequence, low probability. That's it. So, we get some high consequence, low probability activities. Process safety would be another way to talk to that. That we cannot lose focus of having a look at these particular risks within our organisations while implementing our hearts and minds or a behavioural safety program, because we got to ensure that we have the right controls in place for the right risks. So it's being reaffirmed, and we continue to learn that that must continue to run in parallel, programs like that in high risk industries. And the implementation and embedding plan is critical. And of course, we can all appreciate this. We can appreciate this in the workspace, but also in private life. We'll take something on, it makes sense. We get energized, we get excited, and we got to make sure it actually turns into a routine, into a habit, into process to actually make that work. And and speaking, it was down the track around the embedding plan, the fatigue project that's run for the last number of years with Tasrail. It's been a case of taking really good science and solid science such as FADE, the FADE score, and also putting a self-assessment process in play as well, using the Safety Circle, saying, hey, this is where I'm at, this is what the data's telling me where I'm at, and being able to actually say, hey, I'm actually not fit for work today, we're going to need to make a change here, as opposed to just purely relying on, we have a FADE score, and I won't go into detail that today, but we've actually got a score which is measured my sleep opportunity. And for any person in the real world, we understand that sleep opportunity doesn't always result in sleep. So it's marrying those two pieces up. So it's been really industry leading to actually take this on. And it's been fantastic to hear too that, now the self-assessment iPad driven information is just coming through all the time now. And it's really enabling supervisors and managers to have good conversations with their people to make sure they're fit for work. All right, and if you've got any questions about any of these things, folks, as we're going, please be typing them in, as Stephanie's already shared. And yeah, at the end, Stephanie will be able to ask us, and we will answer it to the best of our ability. All right, and here, this is as far as the embedding piece. That's actually one of the general managers for Asset Services, Reece Prestige there, signing in. The entire organisation at the different areas now have Safety Circle banners in play. It's a part of every morning in all their meetings. There's a circle or a value share. It's actually how do we integrate the circle language into all that we do and make sure that it's relevant to actually what we're doing as well. And you know, having different initiatives from safety champions, you know, safety circle champions, through to how that integrates in with the current structures around committees and those types of pieces, again, was integral for the results that have been achieved, as far as, you know, ensuring that it's actually embedded. So, you know, getting really clear about that at a diagnostic phase or an initial phase, as far as what are these systems and processes and how can we actually integrate into those to actually, you know, maximize the value or maximize the outcome. And, you know, the language for positive change, or we call it the language challenge. It was really interesting the other day talking with both Matthew Patton, the General Manager of Freight Services, and Stephen Dietrich, CEO of Tasrail, of how recently there was a conversation with a new rail operator as well. And he provided some feedback to the CEO, and he goes, oh, you know, I'll try and get that done. And the young rail operator turned around and goes, are you going to try, Steve, or are you actually going to do it? And it was just that classic moment of how language shapes, you know, what our likely outcome will be. And, you know, and Steve, you know, took that on the chin. He goes, no, good call. I'll actually do that. You know, I won't just try. So actually getting really clear about, you know, where our language, you know, sits. And, you know, we often talk about the distinction between, say, an accident and an incident. And the reason why we, you know, put incidents inside the circle is when we call something an incident, we're more likely to get curious about how that happened and why, and then learn from it. Yeah, because often an accident, you know, particularly if I think about 15-year-old myself, you know, it was a good way to not be responsible as far as to what happened. You know, and again, in the safety context, you know, if we've got a rule or a particular process, you know, that is, you know, allowing us to do safe work, that's a must. It's not a should, because, you know, it's not optional to wear your PPE if you're going to take on a particular task that requires your PPE, or it's, you know, not optional to put our seatbelt on when we drive the car if we're actually going to drive our car inside the circle and, you know, maximize our chances of not having a, you know, worse injury than one already if we were to have a crash. So getting really clear with regards to the language and making sure that we're setting ourselves up to succeed, and being really clear and also positive with regards to, you know, how we're setting expectations amongst not just our work groups but our entire organisations. All right, and, you know, the other piece is here the My Reason events and my Why events. So if you ever have the opportunity to visit Tasrail up at Techno Park, you'll see a large wall like this, and also smaller versions of that throughout the depots. And this is a way for the people in those particular areas to really not just know each other, but to actually say, if I'm going to go have a chat, say with Steve there holding his granddaughter, one of the drivers up at Burnie, you know, I can actually, you know, have a very personal conversation and, you know, ask Steve about his family. And, you know, I also remember that Steve really loves his garden, and automatically our conversations are different. And as a result of that, we can actually, you know, then really support each other to be inside the circle at a much more effective level. And as you can see at the bottom there, the values of Tasrail, it's actually, you know, all of those things obviously are very much inside the circle. And being remarkable is great, because when we look to be remarkable, we're looking to actually work out where boundaries are and actually, you know, push new ones. And that actually then allows us to continuously learn and improve, which is absolutely fundamental to nailing the health and safety challenge and wellbeing challenge, you know, the mental health side as well. All right, and as far as how does that, you know, show up in statistics, or, you know, we how can we actually see that? So it's really amazing with regards to the amount of kilometres that these trains do travel. And if we look at here mainline derailments, and it was really interesting talking to some of the people at Tasrail who have been there for, you know, 40+ years, and saying things like, we used to be good at derailments and we're not good at that anymore, which is a really positive thing, because we're not doing it very often. So here you can see that there's been a, you know, well before we got involved, but a lot of effort by Tasrail for many years to actually shift this. And we got involved obviously that 2016, 17, and, you know, it's continued that downward trend, which is fantastic. And, you know, and all that has been amongst, you know, dramatically increasing freight volumes, which is absolutely fantastic. So as a result of the reliability of not, you know, derailing anymore, and actually, you know, the incredible investment at a state and federal level with regards to the infrastructure of Tasrail since it became, you know, back into the hands of the government, has been absolutely fantastic with regards to the growth. And, you know, hearing them now focusing on, you know, how they're going to make these locomotives not big diesel guzzling, you know, pieces, you know, still by far environmentally better than, you know, trucks on the road. However, excuse me, how are we going to get the electric, you know, engines into the future to continue to be able to be, you know, the greenest option available, or the best environmental option? All right, excuse me there. And as far as injuries go, and, you know, we all appreciate, you know, lost time injuries have their place, and it's not everything. However, it's a great a great negotiation point when you're going to go speak to your workers' compensation insurer. But also, it also is a reflection too, when we, you know, understand the process, and we actually have good process with regards to looking after people, and, you know, ensuring that we are not having any major incidents happen that results in a person actually having a lost time injury. So very, very good, and it's also been fantastic. And some of those numbers there too were pieces that were incidents that happened actually a little while ago that then turned into LTIs down the track. But without getting into details, there's been a good record, and we can also show that that's as a result, I think it's on here, the next one, of being very proactive. So actually having the right lead indicators and considering the lead indicators or the positive performance indicators that are in play. It does explain that lost time injury trend and numbers is as a result of that proactive work done. And, you know, near misses and, you know, the free lessons and observed hazards is continually where we want them to be, and it's also the quality. It's not just the number. And also then if you look at the time to actually resolve is well within the targets, meaning that people can see that when I say something actually happens. You know, so I speak up, we control it, and we actually get an outcome to it. We're actually, as a result of that, getting some really good outcomes. And I believe that was it there. So if you've had any questions or any thoughts that have come up through any of those pieces around Tasrail, please, as I said, put them into the chat. And yeah, we will definitely look to answer those at the end. All right, and I think we're on to being able to watch a video here. So just as we're getting ready to launch the video, this is Dr. Ben Brooks from the University of Tasmania, who we were lucky enough to meet back in, I think it was 2011, or maybe even before that. And now Ben does some work with us as well, which is fantastic. But here Ben will actually start to explain reliability and the science behind our approach, which will then lead us into an opportunity to scan a QR code that'll come up and complete a reliability insight. And the exciting piece is we do that, we'll give ourselves a little bit of time, and we'll be able to feed some live data back to this group now. So the group here today in this webinar, you'll be able to see you know, where that is, and we'll be able to have a conversation around those. But also you'll receive a personalised report into your email straight away as well, so you can actually take something away from today's webinar and have a think about how you could implement some different things in your workplace to continue improving your culture in a positive direction. So I'll, Stephanie, if it's all right, if you could play this video from Ben, and we'll move on to the reliability insight after that.
Hi everyone, my name is Ben Brooks. I'm a Senior Associate at Safety Circle and an Associate Professor at the University of Tasmania. And I'm here to talk to you today about reliability in the context of workplace health and safety culture and systems. We love this concept. It comes out of the highly reliable organisation theory that Carleen Roberts and her colleagues developed in the 1990s in the States. And they studied organisations like nuclear-powered aircraft carriers and looked at the difference between these organisations and your garden variety organisation in order to understand how they achieved the very highest level of performance at the very peak of their capacity. And the things that they came up with are things like people were always concerned with how they might fail. They were very sensitive to changes in risk. They were highly committed to being resilient in the face of difficult situations, and they listened to their people. And so we've taken this concept of reliability and studied it in order to understand what most of us want, which is we want
anything you need us to do,
sorts of
Stephanie?
behaviours that are at the discretion of the individual out there in the workplace to be the correct behaviour, or behaviour that actually leads to them going home safe and well today. And if you think back to old health and safety, then what we were focused on was compliance with the law. We did audits, and it was generally punitive or punishment-based approach. But at Safety Circle, we changed the motivation around health and safety, and we link that change in motivation to an agreement. There are lots of agreements that we make in the world. We make an agreement when we get a driver's license to follow the rules on the road, and contracts are just a form of agreement. But we make an agreement around the fundamental elements of getting health and safety right in the workplace, and link that to the Safety Circle method, Safety Circle thinking. The insights tool that you're going to use is reflective of that agreement, and I'd encourage you to get stuck into that now and to generate some insights for your own organisation. So I'm Ben Brooks for Safety Circle, and I look forward to meeting you soon.
Hi folks, Oliver Fearman here from the Safety Circle team. I will just bring up this QR code for you, and that'll give you an opportunity then with your device to scan that. So there it is. Please scan the QR code there, follow the prompters, and that will introduce you to the reliability insight tool. Take a moment to complete that, and we will share with you the results for the group in a moment.
Excellent. Thanks for doing that, everyone. So Ollie's just having a look at just downloading the data, and then he's going to share the results with us. Thanks, Ollie.
Thanks, Marty. And Steph, if you can give me control of the screen share, I'll put these up for people. Fantastic. Thank you, Steph.
So have you explained what your jazzy shirt's about, Ollie?
No, I have not, Marty, and that would be a good point. Are those results up? I'll share my jazzy shirt as well, but we'll talk to the jazzy shirt and then we will talk to the results. So thank you, Marty. Good reminder. I've gotten so used to them now, I've forgotten I got it on. So the shirt is part of TradeMut, who you may have heard about, who are a couple of young tradies who, through their experience in the trade industry, identified the importance of getting the conversation happening in the workplace from a mental health and wellbeing perspective. And wearing a shirt like this tends to start a conversation, which is the intent. And then on the back here, hopefully see that, there is the flag that this is a conversation starter, and the support network that the guys have set up through This Is a Conversation Starter makes, in essence, EAP services provided to anyone in the construction industry who's needing that support, and a fantastic cause to be supporting. Hence wearing this shirt that's probably not my normal choice of coloration. Typically I'd be something a bit more similar to Marty and Co, but that's what that one is. And then with the results up here, we have a view of the reliability that you have shared with us very kindly, folks. And in a moment, we will head back to the slides to sort of talk to what those look like. But I guess the good news is we got 40% of the folks present are working in spaces where they feel they're highly reliable in the speaking up and taking action elements of health and safety and wellbeing, and that's fantastic. And similarly, not surprising to see that we have a number of workplaces who don't feel currently that that's where they're at in terms of the reliability and effectiveness of their communications in the health, safety and wellbeing space. And we will debrief the elements that lie beneath that in a moment. I will just return the control to Steph so that we can do so. Thank you, Steph. So the first element that you folks would have answered some questions in relation to is speak up. And really the intent behind this, well, basically, as Marty said earlier, the intent of the safety circle and what we're about is giving people a common language to be able to raise concerns and talk to issues that they've identified as outside the circle and get clear on how they're then going to bring those back into the circle. And what we know from experience is that the more we have a team who are comfortable and empowered to speak up and raise those issues, the more ability we then have to take action on them. So the questions that we ask there and the focus of that is very much about what space do we create for members of our teams to speak up and participate in health and safety, and how reliable do we feel that we are in that regard. And so the board behind me here is actually from a conversation earlier today with a variety of new starters with Zeus Victoria, one of our clients. And what you can see in the red here is them speaking up about their experience prior to arriving at that organisation and what they've seen in the workplace and challenges they know they themselves have from a health, safety and wellbeing perspective. And the general feedback after discussing that and talking to what it takes to actually manage that risk well and get it inside the circle was that they were actually very excited to be at an organisation where they had a tool that allowed them to get clearer on what some of these challenges are, like getting focused on just getting the job done, putting the animals ahead of ourselves, great to be passionate about something and support it. And then it's really important also to understand the power and value of keeping ourselves in great shape to then continue to participate in what we're passionate about. And the team, general feedback was, thank you very much for giving us an insight into this tool, and we look forward to working with a team that's going to support us to then be more effective in this space. Similarly, the folks you can see on the slide there are a mine in Victoria that we were working with, who, when we started the program, had some pretty poor performance in terms of hazard reporting and speak up. And despite really good mateship on site, unfortunately, we were mates that were letting each other get away with riding our luck and accepting that, rather than mates who were pointing it out and doing something to solve it. And that said, once we rolled out the program and talked to the importance of all the different reasons the team had for getting home safe and well, we had a workforce that were very aligned about the significance of actually raising those issues and speaking up. So much so that they had a 148% increase in hazard reporting the year of the program, or after the program. It was late in 2017, and the results showed in 2018. But the years prior to that, 3 years prior, the average was 148% less than what they saw. And the really great news is, still to this day, they continue to hit that mark and higher. They've actually been increasing their hazard reporting ongoing since then, which is fantastic. And obviously then it's about, right, how do we take action and close that out? Anything you'd add, Marty? Ooh. So the next element we looked at was then controlling and or reporting. If we get that speak up, fantastic. Now, how do we support people to stay engaged with that? And at this point, I would like to hand over to Marty, because he's been leading the charge with some of our programs that have been very improvement focused. It'd be great to get some insights. So I'll hand to you, Marty.
Yep. So one of the organisations we've been working with now for a few years, Fenner Dunlop, and they've really focused and used Safety Circle as one on the common language and having that common way of interrupting, but also really focusing on how do we actually improve. So one of the things that we worked with them on was actually what we call circle boards, which they have up in their workplace, which then they use to actually then look at, what are the things, or, in toolboxes and their pre-starts, what are the things that could get us outside the circle, or what are our challenges outside the circle. Excuse me, and then working as a team for how they can actually bring that inside the circle and then taking action on that. And one of the initiatives they've put in place all across Australia is that every month they run an awards session, and they give an award to the best example of operating inside the circle and improvement, or people exhibiting the behaviours of being inside the circle, and the person gets a prize. So they've found it a really good way to reward and acknowledge people for actually making the effort. Because as we know, it's actually easier to be slack and lazy than what it is to actually make sure we've got the right equipment, the right systems and people inside the circle. So I really want to keep on rewarding and acknowledging people for that. So they've found that to be, really effective, and just helping people keep in that proactive space. So one of the things then, from a cultural point of view and from a behaviour point of view, the actual number of improvements that we're actually making in our workplace is very much, really shows how people are engaged. And one of the things we're really looking for is we're critically looking to actually make sure, we've got everyone, every day on the field, actually playing to manage the risk and actually supporting each other. So we really want to keep people switched on. And so engagement is very much related to how we're actually improving. And if you look at the, ultra reliable and highly reliable workplaces around the world, then what you do is you see that they make a huge amount of improvements, on an ongoing basis. So one of the great things about our work is we've got to, look at lots of, great workplaces around the world. And interesting, particularly noticed it in some plants that we went to in Japan years ago. We just saw them doing lots of high risk work. They were actually operating lots of, big plant machinery, things that could really hurt people. And then, yeah, what you saw was them, very much working very safely, but also just their level of improvement was quite extraordinary. So one workplace, there was 300 people working in this plant, and they were making 3,000 improvements a year. So it's one of those areas that we really want to focus on in our workplaces and in the field, is actually making sure that people are reporting and controlling things, but also that we share the improvements and really acknowledge the improvements people are making. Do you want to talk to that one on the slide, Ollie?
Absolutely, Marty, thank you. Yeah, so on the slide there is actually an improvement, one of the many submitted as part of a program working with one of the Tasmanian GBEs down here. And I guess their business structure at the moment is such that a significant amount of their particularly hazardous and challenging work is done by subcontractors. And the engagement with us was really focused on, given that the contractors were actually responsible for taking on that risk, giving them this tool and an opportunity to build alignment around the value of getting home safe and well and managing risk well, with a real focus then on how are we doing currently at that, and what is it we're going to do to continue to improve our reliability in this space. And it wasn't so much setting a bar of these are the standards you must improve, as it was saying we want the standards to improve. You as the professionals we engage need to make the call on what that looks like. Please use this tool and please participate. And then what we saw in supporting the guys to take that challenge on and really get into action was fantastic. 158 wellbeing, health and safety improvements submitted in 16 months of the program across the 3 regions involved. And the level of participation and engagement that we saw, I mean, it's not unusual, unfortunately, in our line of work when you first hold a conversation about health and safety to find people walking in with their head down, oh, I don't want to be a part of this. And a number of those contractors, certainly their experience prior to engaging with the tool and the program was that being in the classroom and that learning events were not something that they had ever been respected or fully been able to participate in. And once they participated in the first parts of that leadership program in particular, and seeing that this was about being practical and about applying life skills that many of them had given the risk that they take on in that line of work, the participation was amazing and continues to be. So really fantastic program that we're proud to be working with, and look forward to seeing what these folks continue to do as they increase that improvement in their industry. Next element we had some questions in there around was around interruption. And I guess if speaking up and taking action are the fundamentals in terms of steering us forwards, the interruption piece in particular is how we make that difference now in the moment. In the workplace, when that teammate is doing something that lands them out here and at risk, potentially they don't see it. And it's then about, as team members, what opportunities do we have, what skill set do we have to then call that and support them to shift that practice in a way that gets them home safe and well. And a key element of the agreement that we set with team members in the field is that we're willing to interrupt each other for the value of supporting that teammate to get home safe and well. The image you can see there is a green card, which is something that each of the participants get as part of that conversation. On the back, Marty's got on his hand modeling it for us now. Thank you, Marty. On the back, it has a space to be able to write our reasons for getting home safe and well, which obviously are the things that help drive those choices consistent with getting home safe and well. Marty's sharing them there, the name of his lovely wife and daughter, which are very good reasons to be choosing to get home safe and well. And the green side has become something that, while it wasn't our intent initially when we were providing this to people, one of the organisations we work with in the far north of the country, the Cairns Regional Council team, who are a fantastic crew up in the far north of Australia, we get the pleasure of working with. A member of their team was clearly a soccer umpire in a past life, as he came back from his session and said to his team, right, you're yet to have this conversation, but the key thing you need to get is, if I pull out this green card, I'm just asking you to step on the field. It's not the yellow or red that asks you to leave the field. It's, right, game on, please step up, something here we need to manage. And since then, they have very much ran with that, and it's fantastic to see not only the council themselves, but many of the community groups that they work with clear on what that green card means, and up for supporting each other to play the game every day, which is what we need to be doing. Marty, anything you'd add?
Yeah, well, one of the interesting ones with Cairns, because we're doing the program with Cairns Regional Council, which you've got, 1,200 odd people. And then as part of working in Cairns for, several years, we then engaged with Cairns Hardware up there and ran a program with them. And it was just interesting then, them knowing that Cairns Regional Council had done it. And I remember one of the Cairns Hardware people being passed by someone one day, driving a council vehicle and pulled in front of him, and he was, not impressed with the driving style, thought it was outside the circle. And it was just interesting then, he said, I would have ranted and raved in the past, but instead of doing that, he said, I just gave him a green card, he said, and got the response of, yep, sorry, mate, and off they went, he said, and then it was just a way to, interrupt, draw attention to the, what he considered unsafe behaviour without doing the rant and raving, or as he said, I typically would have given him the bird or done something else that was inappropriate. Instead, we kept it in the constructive, which is great. I think for me then, with using this tool as an interruption, is a way where it's like, often what we find, in life, and we found this, all over the, the countries we've worked in, whether it's in America, whether it's, New Zealand, Australia, is often what we've actually done is build a culture or have a culture where rather than actually support each other to be inside the circle, what we actually do is we actually walk past things and actually ignore things. And we actually let it actually lie, outside the circle. So actually, rather than playing to win, in a lot of ways, we've been, our actions have actually set us up to lose, because we haven't actually been supporting each other or interrupting each other in a positive way. So we found it very, useful for that point of view. It's also why, you'll see them around the place, Tasmania, lots of other workplaces, Fender now, all their team around Australia have got the, the green badge on their shirts, and part of the reason for that is to reinforce things, but also, again, it's just an easy way to actually interrupt people. Because what we find is that as humans, what we can tend to do is we tend to actually often prioritise the work, getting the job done, above our health and safety. It's like Ollie was talking to as far as the zoos go. Sometimes in the past they would have prioritised, looking after the animals rather than looking after themselves to look after the animals. And so then one of the things then we're really encouraging people to do is actually then really support each other and interrupt in a way that actually gets them, to get people back inside the circle. And of course, if our thinking at the time is just get the job done and we're compromising our health and safety, once we actually get people to actually stop and think, then typically they will make different choices or better choices, which is why then we really focus on shifting the thinking of people and really getting the team around it. And the other thing we've found over the years with the circle is that there's lots of ways then to actually use it as well. So one of the workplaces we were working in years ago, they did some really high risk work, scared the bejeebies out of me, but these guys were working, and I say guys because it's a very blokey workplace, but they were working on the transmission towers. And when you're up working on the transmission towers, you've always got a spotter on the ground, but you can't actually directly communicate with them because they're a long way away. So what they found was that they would actually do this and just actually, draw a circle in the air as a way of actually getting someone's attention that they were doing something that wasn't up to standard, or they needed to stop and reposition themselves. So lots of ways where people can use the circle as a way of actually, of interrupting each other. And last one, just as a little example, we were doing this work in Boston in the USA, and we were working with the maintenance team, and anyway, we got the maintenance team engaged that we wanted to do this and we wanted to manage the risk well, and particularly that we needed to interrupt the things that were outside the circle. And the next day, one of the maintenance people was in the plant and saw an operator, and he was using a pair of what I would call vice grips, you know, so basically adjustable crescent spanner, whatever you want to call it, and he put that on the isolation switch, so it made it look, so it made the isolation think that there was someone there pushing this, you know, not letting the machine run. And so he was basically then could then hop inside the machine. So he was actually on the inside of this machine. So if the vice grips had fallen off, it would have started running again, and potentially, you know, he could have been killed. Anyway, the maintenance person came along and he saw it, and he interrupted him constructively, you know, got him back inside the circle. And it was interesting, you know, they all acknowledged that prior to that work done, you know, in the days before, in the past, they would not have said anything because he was a production person, right? You know, and this other guy was the maintenance. And typically what they'd done in the past was they, you know, I'll ignore the production people being unsafe, and then maintenance will ignore the, you know, production would ignore maintenance being unsafe, rather than working as a team to actually support each other to go home safe and well. So great result, and it was interesting. He shared it, you know, with the leadership team, and it got shared around the organisation, and, you know, really got, you know, acknowledged for what a great job it was to do that interruption. And it straight away started shifting, you know, that culture and that workplace into a more positive place, and a place where people felt comfortable to interrupt regardless of their position, because, you know, sometimes we treat people differently based on their position. And so one of the things that we actually really want to get across teams is that we, you know, our well-being, health and safety is just as important if I'm, you know, I'm on the tools, you know, I'm the cleaner, you know, I'm the lab tech, or I'm the CEO, I'm the managing director. It doesn't make any difference. We're all playing for the same outcome. And we find if we can have teams aligned behind that outcome, then they're more likely to interrupt, which is also why we want to build that social capital within our organisations. So we're more likely to say something to someone. Not quite on the interruption subject, but we did have when we ran this event a few weeks ago in Hobart, one of the questions we had was around, okay, so, you know, this, you know, we're talking about safety circle, we're talking about, you know, the circle, how does it go around, you know, well-being, you know, and the mental health? And it's interesting that while, you know, we use the word, you know, safety circle these days, you know, we will often just use the circle, and really key focus is we're talking about the whole person. We want the whole person to go home safe and well, so mental health and everything, and well-being is a key focus. And it's actually one of some of the areas where organisations have actually seen the biggest improvement. And to the point, if we actually do this really well and we really get it into the language in the workplace, then what you find is everyone is prepared to, you know, say something. Everyone is actually prepared to interrupt. And I'm thinking about a program we ran years ago with Cosmos, and Cosmos organisation in Hobart that was at the time looking after people with, you know, significant behavioural and behavioural challenges, and you know, physical challenges, and they embedded the language and the interruptions so well within their team members, and used it so often that their clients actually started using it back to the carers. When they thought they were doing something that was outside the circle, that they would actually use the circle, would say circle, and it was something then that became the normal way and just an easy way of interrupting and helping each other, whether that be about well-being, health or safety.
Excellent. And I guess the other element we've talked to in that, Marty, but just important to be specific about, is that as well as that in gaining people's commitment to actually making those interruptions, the other commitment we ask the people is actually to accept the interruption. Because in line with what some of the examples Marty shared there, one of the fundamentals in getting people confident to speak up in those moments they need to is knowing that their teammates will accept that and will be willing to accept that. And actually one of our clients in Victoria that we worked with, we ended up working with them because they saw a contractor who we'd worked with in the past on site actually have their apprentice interrupt the supervisor on the job for being outside the circle, and the manager who was walking past at the time had never seen that dynamic on his site of an apprentice being willing to interrupt the most senior member of the team. And he saw it and stopped and went, hang on, what was that you just did? And the apprentice was able to explain, well, we've all agreed that we want to get home safe and well, and we'll manage the risk well, and right now he was doing something that's outside the circle, and I want him to get home safe and well, so I pointed it out. And he'll accept that because he wants to get home safe and well. And one of those real powers of that tool and that conversation is that when we understand that the motivation behind an interruption is good intent, because sometimes it lands like I'm being insulted about the way I do my work, and no one actually appreciates that typically. But when we know that, hang on, my teammate's just concerned I'm going to get home safe and well today, it opens up an avenue for a conversation where potentially the person doing the interruption gets to learn, but similarly the person interrupting knows that that other person's going to respect that I'm looking out for them. And fundamentally, in terms of taking away some of those barriers for people to speak up, knowing that your voice counts for yourself and that person, and everyone having that agreement, proves to be very powerful in that regard. That said, I think we've probably come to the point in the conversation where it's over to questions from yourselves, folks. So we'll check in with Stephanie, what questions have come in, and go from there.
All right, thank you everyone. So as our presenters from Safety Circle have said, if there are any questions for today's team, please use the please use your questions window on the control panel to type and submit any questions for our presenters today, Martin Bradfield, Oliver Bodak, and Oliver Fearman from Safety Circle. A reminder as well to everyone that today's session has been recorded and will be made available on the WorkSafe Tasmania YouTube page following WorkSafe Tasmania month. So a question has come in. Acknowledgement, great presentation into the Safety Circle. Just want to ask about compliance in the workplace and accepting the Safety Circle. Any strategies that you use to increase compliance with the Safety Circle?
Yeah, great question. Couple of things. One is that what we found years ago with we'd been working with organisations, particularly in Tasmania, for a number of years, and one of the things we found actually that sometimes we got some extraordinary results. For example, one engineering company we worked with, they'd lost 200 days to workplace injuries one year. The next year they lost 2, which was fantastic, and really managed to sustain that. And then we found in other organisations we got great engagement and improvement, and over time it was like, what was the level of compliance? How do we actually sustain that? So we did a research and business project with Professor Ben Brooks, Dr. Brooks, and he found that 3 key things needed to be in place, and one was personal engagement, which is very much one of the focuses of Safety Circle, and then needs to be supportive leadership and the regular reinforcement. So I think, in answer to your question, for me in compliance, one of the things we do is work with the leaders, and particularly we call it effective field coaching, and really looking to develop the leaders to actually then draw, make sure that there's a line there and drawing the line, and actually then really coaching to keep people inside the circle. And we find that that makes a huge difference. I think secondly, as far as compliance go, really one of the things that people take on that agreement that will follow the rules and will follow the standards, but also that they actually get that opportunity to speak up when those rules or standards are not risk relevant, or they don't think they make sense, which means that it actually helps to get the team members to actually own those rules and standards and have an opportunity to improve them. And that really makes a difference with compliance, because if people understand why the rule and standards there or have a role in actually in developing them, then they're a lot more likely to comply and follow. Anything else for you to add, Ollie's?
I'd say that's probably nailed it, Marty. I guess that's to a large degree the Tasrail program around fatigue was focusing on how do we support our team to be able to comply with being fit to work. And then the structure for that was around, well, are we inside or outside of the circle from a fit to work perspective, and integrating systems and that cultural agreement in a way that then enables that to be something we can access and use to coach and support each other to meet those compliance expectations.
All right, thank you. There is still time to submit any questions to today's presenters. Please use the question window on the control panel to type and submit those questions. Today's session is also part of a broader number of events online and in person running throughout October as part of WorkSafe Tasmania month. We are continuing again next week, which is our final week. Please do head to worksafe.tas.gov.au to see what other in-person and online events we are running. Not appearing to have any further questions come through. So we'll wait a few minutes. So with no further questions coming through, I'll begin to wrap up to today's presentation. So thank you very much to our presenters today, Martin Bradfield, Oliver Bodak and Oliver Fearman from Safety Circle. And thank you everyone for attending today's presentation, Work Safe, Enjoy Life, Teamwork and Partnership Can Make a Positive Difference, Lessons from the Field. Following today's webinar, you will receive a survey about the presentation. We do appreciate you providing us with your feedback. To find out more about Tasmania's WorkSafe month, please head to worksafe.tas.gov.au. On behalf of the WorkCover Tasmania Board and WorkSafe Tasmania, thank you for joining us today. Excellent.